Snow had soaked through the cracked asphalt of the Portlands by the time the last of the black SUVs disappeared south toward the lake, and Emilio Bastri lay alone in a February alley with 2 bullets in his left side and the specific, uncomplicated thought that someone he trusted had put them there. He did not know yet that the woman who would empty his wastepaper basket every morning for the next 3 weeks, large, unhurried, smelling faintly of vanilla hand cream, was the only reason he had not bled out on that pavement. Gwen Hallett was 26 years old, originally from the East End of Hamilton, currently renting a basement apartment in Scarborough with a mold problem she had reported to her landlord 4 times without result. She worked the overnight shift at the Lakeview Diner on Cherry Street, a 24-hour place near the water that served construction crews, night nurses, and people who had nowhere better to be at 3 a.m. She was a big woman, 5'4", somewhere north of 260 pounds, with wide hips and arms that were genuinely strong from 8 hours of hauling full bus trays across a greasy floor every single night. She had dark brown eyes, a gap between her front teeth, and the particular patience that develops in people who have been overlooked so long they've stopped expecting otherwise. Invisibility, she had found, was not always a disadvantage. The Lakeview Diner sat close enough to the Portlands that you could smell the lake through the kitchen exhaust on damp nights. Gwen knew the area the way shift workers know any route they walk in the dark, by feel, by sound, by instinct. She cut through the side streets every morning after clocking out, because the transit connection home didn't run until 5, and she wasn't going to stand in -18 waiting for it. It was a Thursday in February. She had finished her shift at 4:30, still in uniform, black polyester trousers, the diner's burgundy polo, the long white apron strings she always knotted twice around her waist. Her hands smelled like dish soap and the vanilla she lotion she used after every shift because the detergent stripped her hands raw. She had a bus to catch. She heard the gunshots before she saw anything. 3, then a pause, then one more, then vehicles, accelerating hard, disappearing, then nothing. Gwen stood at the mouth of an alley between 2 storage units and did not move for a full 10 seconds. She was not a brave woman by instinct. She was a tired woman who wanted to go home and take her shoes off. Then she heard breathing. She found him 40 meters into the alley, half collapsed against a chain-link fence. Tall, powerfully built, wearing a charcoal wool coat that was already ruined with blood. He had tattoos above the collar, dark geometric lines running up the side of his neck. His jaw was set with the particular stubbornness of a man whose body had stopped cooperating with his intention. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and what was in his face was not relief. It was pure threat. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" Gwen said. She crouched down, left side spreading fast. "I'm going to look at the wound." He grabbed her wrist. The grip was still startling despite everything. "You don't know who I am." "I know you're bleeding out onto a parking lot," Gwen said. She pulled her wrist free. Not gently but firmly, the way she moved bus trays off a crowded counter. "If you don't let me help you right now, you won't make it to the street." He stared at her. Whatever he saw, the complete absence of theatrics, the flat pragmatism, made him release a breath and let go. She worked fast. She pulled off her apron, folded it into a compress against the worst entry point, and used the long cotton ties to bind it as tightly as she could manage. She had done food handler's first aid training 3 years ago and had assumed it would never matter. She pressed until her arms burned and she could feel his pulse under her palms, fast and thin, but there. She found a phone on a dead guard nearby and called 911. She gave the address. Then, because she had spent enough time near the Portlands at 4 in the morning to understand what kind of men drove black SUVs through it at that hour, she left the phone next to him with the call still connected and walked away quickly without looking back. She was 2 streets north by the time headlights swept into the alley. 3 weeks later, she was organizing a linen closet in a private recovery suite on the top floor of a clinic she had never previously heard of, and she was beginning to understand that her life had changed shape in a way that was not going to change back. She had not sought any of this out. The position had been offered to her by a man named Dario. Still eyes, expensive jacket, very deliberate politeness, who had appeared at her apartment door on a Sunday and explained that a private client required domestic support, $3,000 a week, car service, discretion expected. He had not said anything about the Portlands. He hadn't needed to. She had looked at his face and understood. She had accepted. She had not been given the kind of choice that required deliberation. Emilio Bastri was what she had expected, in the sense that the reality of him confirmed every distant impression she'd formed in the alley. Imposing, even, horizontal, dark-haired, careful, with the quality of a man who had arranged himself around authority for so long it had become structural. He had tattoos down both forearms, a way of tracking movement without appearing to watch, and a habit of silence that was not emptiness but calculation. The first morning she cleaned his room, he said nothing. The second, he said, "You were at the Portlands." "I walk home that way after my shift," Gwen said. "Convenient." "I missed my bus, so I disagree." She straightened the pillow. "I tied the tourniquet." He looked at her. "My people believe someone else did." "I know," Gwen said. She picked up the wastepaper basket. "It's not my business." She left before he could respond. In the hallway, she stood still for a moment and breathed carefully. She was not frightened of him exactly. She was frightened of the geometry of the situation, the way it had swallowed her ordinary life and replaced it with this pressurized thing she had no framework for. She was a woman who poured coffee at 2 a.m. for strangers and walked home through the cold. She was not a person who was supposed to end up here. Emilio Bastri, she was learning, operated by his own gravity. She was in the supply closet on a Wednesday afternoon when she heard Dario's voice through the thin wall. She was not trying to listen. She listened anyway. "We confirmed it," Dario said. "Offshore account, registered in her name. 1.8 million, 2 transfers, paid out before the Portlands." A silence. "She gave them my schedule," Emilio said. Not a question, a verdict. "Yes, but the call, whoever placed the 911 call from your phone, knew the location, knew which side the wound was on, used correct binding technique. That's not random. Someone was there after." "Annalise was there," Emilio said. "She's been telling you that," Dario said carefully. "She told me herself, the silk scarf, the vanilla perfume," a pause. "She said she held on to me until she heard sirens." Gwen set the box of supplies down on the shelf so slowly she didn't make a sound. The vanilla, her hand lotion. Shoppers Drug Mart, vanilla and shea butter, $4.99 for a pump bottle. She had applied it at 4:15 in the morning before walking out the door. Her hands had smelled of it when she pressed them against his side in the alley. The silk scarf, her apron strings, long white cotton ties, polyester blend, folded double and knotted with the quick-release hitch she used to secure bus trays. The same knot she had made 900 times, not silk, not a scarf. Annalise Kern had taken what she had done and rebuilt it into something from a different story. Gwen stood in the closet while the light through the high window shifted and thought about her mother in Hamilton, who had worked 2 jobs her entire adult life and never once asked for credit from anyone. She thought about what happened to ordinary people who stepped into the wrong version of events in a world like this one. She thought about whether she was capable of letting a lie stand, this specific lie, aimed in this specific direction, at this specific cost. She thought about the apron strings she had knotted in a parking lot at -18 with her bare hands. That was mine, she thought. Annalise arrived on a Friday in a black SUV with two of her own people, wearing a camel-colored coat that was clearly expensive, and moving through the suite as though she had always been the person whose opinions about it mattered. She was very thin, very controlled, with the kind of dark-haired symmetry that read as effortless, and was never effortless. Gwen set the coffee on the sideboard and did not make eye contact. Emilio sat in the armchair near the window. Dario was behind him, two men near the door. He held a glass of water he hadn't touched, and his expression was the same as always, still, watching, giving nothing away. Emilio. Annalise's voice was warm and low and very practiced. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. I came as soon as—" "Sit down," he said. She sat. She crossed her ankles, folded her hands, and looked at him with the specific expression of a person who has rehearsed grief until it has become indistinguishable from the real thing. Gwen, refilling the coffee, gave her credit for the discipline of it. "There's an account registered under your maiden name," Emilio said. 1.8 million. 2 transfers made before the Portlands. The silence was long. Annalise didn't break under it, which told Gwen something about her. "It's a setup," Annalise said. "The Strand people have access to my history. They know how to." "You knew my schedule." "I didn't." "You knew the route." Emilio. Her voice climbed in urgency but not in volume. "Controlled all the way. I was there that night. I drove out to the Portlands when I heard what happened. I found you in the alley. I dragged you myself. You were barely conscious. I tied my scarf around the wound. She reached forward and put her hand on his arm. You remember you told me you could smell my perfume, that you held on." Gwen set a cup on the sideboard very carefully. "The joy scarf," Annalise continued. "The cream silk one, your birthday gift to me last spring. I wrapped it around your side and I stayed until I heard the sirens. You are breathing right now because of what I did." Emilio's eyes moved to her hand on his arm. Gwen watched the logic of it work through him, the debt logic, the blood and owing calculation that structured his world. A life owed outweighed almost anything else. Annalise had understood that when she chose her story. "The binding was still on him when he arrived," Dario said, "ruined by the blood but present." "Because I put it there," Annalise said softly. "No." The word came out of Gwen's mouth at normal volume and landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Every head turned. She was standing by the sideboard in her black trousers and a grey pullover that had never been designed for a moment like this, and she felt the weight of being looked at. The breadth of her frame, the plainness of her face. And she stood through all of it without moving. "I'm sorry." Annalise's voice had acquired a very fine, precise edge. "Is the housekeeper speaking to us?" "The binding wasn't silk," Gwen said. She looked only at Emilio. "It was white cotton. Polyester blend. The apron tie from a server's uniform folded double and knotted with a quick-release hitch to hold pressure without cutting circulation. The wound was below the floating rib on the left side. You were conscious when I found you. You grabbed my wrist. I told you that you didn't have a choice." The room was very quiet. Emilio was looking at her with an expression she had not yet seen on his face. She could not name it, but it was different from all his other expressions. "The knot," he said. "It's the same knot I use to fasten bus trays," Gwen said. "I've done it roughly 900 times. I know it in the dark." "This is—" Annalise started to stand. "Emilio, she's the housekeeper. She's heard something and she wants to." "Sit down." He didn't raise his voice. Annalise sat. "You smelled like vanilla," Emilio said. He was still looking at Gwen. "I remembered vanilla. I thought it was your perfume." He said this last part in Annalise's direction without looking at her. "It's hand lotion," Gwen said. $4.99. I use it after every shift because the dish soap dries my hands out." She reached into her trouser pocket and took out her phone. Her hands were steady. She had taken the photograph that morning in the Lakeview bathroom before finishing her shift, because she had looked at herself in the mirror. Hands dark with blood, apron gone, polo soaked through, and understood that she might eventually need to prove something. She hadn't known what. She had taken the photo anyway. She held the phone out. Dario stepped forward and took it. He looked at the screen for a long moment, expressionless, and then passed it to Emilio. The photo was time-stamped 5:14 a.m. Emilio had been admitted to the clinic at 5:47 a.m. In it, Gwen stood in front of a bathroom mirror, still in her uniform. No apron, because she had left it in the alley, her hands and forearms, and the front of her shirt covered in dark red, blood dried on her chin, where she had pressed in close to check his breathing. Emilio studied the photograph. He studied it for longer than was necessary to understand what it showed. Then he handed the phone back to Gwen and said to Dario, "Take Annalise's men out of the building. All of them." Annalise rose to her feet. "Sit," he said. She sat. Dario said quietly that Gwen should wait in the adjoining room. She did. She sat on a small chair and looked at her hands and thought about the basement flat and the mold on the bathroom wall, and what exactly she was going to do with the rest of a life that no longer resembled the one she had woken up to 3 weeks ago. She heard voices from the other room, only Annalise's, climbing and then cutting off. A door. Silence. Dario came for her 20 minutes later. He looked at her with an expression she read as cautious respect, which she decided to accept as sufficient. Emilio was alone by the window when she entered, leaning on the cane, looking out at the city in the early dark. He did not turn around immediately. "She's been managed," he said. "You don't need the specifics." She didn't. She nodded. "You're from Hamilton," he said. "Originally. You walked home through the Portlands because you missed your bus." "Yes." "You found a man bleeding in an alley in February at -18 degrees and stopped to help." "I wasn't going to keep walking," Gwen said. "That's not something I'm able to do." He turned around. His expression had opened in a way she hadn't seen before. Not softer, exactly, but more complete. He looked at her the way she had rarely been looked at. Fully, without the constant small editing that happened when people noticed her size and recalibrated. He looked at her the whole way to the edges. "Most people would have kept walking," he said. "I know." He moved toward her, unhurried, the cane marking each step. He stopped closer than was appropriate for the situation they were technically in, and he was taller than she remembered him from the alley, and the thing in his face was something she recognized slowly as she stood inside it. Genuine regard, not gratitude, not obligation. The real thing. "I owe you my life," he said. The phrasing was deliberate. She understood, from the way he held the words, that in his world they meant something specific and binding. "You don't," Gwen said. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why it matters." He put his hand over hers. His palm was warm, and she noticed a silver scar across his knuckles and the fine, precise pressure of a man being very careful about something. "You're done being invisible, whatever you decide that means." Gwen looked at him. She thought about her mother and the leaking roof and the overnight shift. And all the mornings she had walked home alone through the Portlands because no one had been keeping track of whether she made it. "I'll think about it," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, a real smile, unguarded, the kind that changed the whole structure of his face. "Fair enough," he said. Through the clinic window, Toronto was just beginning to turn over. The first grey light coming off the lake, streetcars beginning their routes along Queen Street, the city working its way unhurried into another February morning. Gwen stood in a room she had never planned to be in, next to a man she had found in the dark, and felt something she had not felt in longer than she could precisely name. The sensation of being seen clearly, without reduction, without the small editing, without being made to take up less space than she actually occupied. She had not gone looking for it. She had been looking for her bus. But some things, she thought, found you anyway.